Everybody awake?
Sir.
Polk wanted to get up and do some push-ups.
Yeah.
I won't make you do that. All right. So I'm going to do a couple short lectures. One's a nutritious one about the effects of refined carbohydrates. The other one's just going to be some exercise ideas you guys can do at the stations, some strategies on how to do those things, different exercise modalities. So first one with the effects of refined carbohydrates. I know the running joke is that I like to fat shame people, right? And this is not a shaming thing. I'm not trying to judge anybody. So this is all just information I wanted to give you guys. However you take that information is totally up to you, okay? So, everybody's heard of refined carbohydrates before? Yeah? So there's a couple different types of carbs, simple and complex. We're going to focus more on the simple today. I'll talk a little bit about the complex carbs. But what gives them their name, all right, simple has a simple chemical structure, so it's very quickly digested into our bodies within about 15 minutes. The complex is going to take a little bit longer to digest, about 30 minutes to an hour. It's going to stay in our system longer, make us feel fuller longer. The complex won't spike our blood sugar right away like the simple carbohydrates do. So that's the main difference, and we'll give some examples of those here in a little bit. So I like to say that 99.8% of the time, I'll walk into a fire station. Okay, I'll look on the counter, I'll look on the kitchen table, I'll see some of those. All right, especially if there's a probie in the station. He wants to make everybody happy, right? So he brings a box of donuts for everybody. Okay, I see some cookies in there from Smith's, maybe.
Dude, that's Louisa's station. It's got to be.
This is all. I see some chips on the counter, most likely. I'll see a plethora of Oreos. And I'll even see the off-brand Oreos, so you guys don't care. So these are all examples of refined carbohydrates. So why do we care, or why are they bad for us? Okay, they contain a lot of sugars, a lot of sucrose, which is your table sugar, high fructose corn syrup, we've all heard of that. Agave syrup, you might hear that term and think, agave is healthy for you, all right? It does the same thing as regular sugar does to us, okay? It has the same effects on us. Refined carbs contain refined grains, okay? So refined grains are grains that all the fiber and all the nutritious stuff has been stripped out of them, okay? So why would you guys think anybody would want to do that?
Build more product.
Yeah, so the fiber,
It's a filler.
the fibrous ones is a lot more bulky to package, so you can put a lot more in a package. It makes it taste better, stripping that stuff out. So it's a money-making thing, right? There are things that are high in carbs that are good for us. Okay, those are going to be on the complex carbohydrate side. So this isn't like a total bashing of carbohydrates altogether. We're strictly talking about the refined sugars, refined carbs that only stay in our system very shortly. So eating refined carbs is linked to drastically increased risk of many diseases, okay, including obesity, heart disease, type 2 diabetes. If you go to any nutrition expert, okay, you're gonna get the same answer. They want you to try to limit your carbohydrate intake, and that's across the board. I don't think you're gonna go to a nutrition expert and they're gonna tell you to eat a bunch of carbs, all right? The only exception would be if you're like an athlete and you're burning, like Michael Phelps burned like 10,000 calories a day, all right? That type of situation, yeah, you eat a bunch of carbohydrates. Refined carbs are still the main source of dietary carbs in many countries. Because why? Because they're cheap and they're affordable. So how do they affect us? We talked about the fiber and vitamins being stripped out. So when they do that, it makes those types of foods empty calories, all right? So keep that word empty in the back of your head because we're gonna talk about calories here in a second. They're digested quickly, okay? Have a high glycemic index. Everybody heard of the glycemic index? Kinda. So being high in the glycemic index means they lead to rapid spikes in your blood sugar and then rapid spikes in insulin levels right after you eat. So foods that are high on the glycemic index have been linked to overeating and increased risks of many diseases. So things that are high on that glycemic index or are considered refined sugars, refined carbs, are going to be mostly the white type of food, the white breads, the white rice, the white pastas, tortillas, okay, all your regular sodas, sweet snacks, breakfast cereals, things like that. Bottom line, though, is what we want to keep in mind is that refined carbs include mostly sugars, processed grains, and they're empty calories, okay? They make our blood sugar spike rapidly, as well as our insulin, which we'll talk about too. So here's a list of some stuff for the glycemic index. It goes from low range to high. All right, things in the low range are the good stuff, and there's tons of other things that we can put on this list. I just put a few. So the stuff that's low to medium is going to be the stuff that's going to leave us fuller. It's going to be in our system a lot longer. So things like apples, oranges, bran cereals, peanuts, cashews, whole wheat stuff. Medium range like brown rice, oatmeal, whole grain breads and whole grain pastas, things like that. And then we get to the high stuff where we want to avoid French fries, the white type baked potatoes, okay? A sweet potato or a yam is going to be on the low end of the glycemic index, okay? So orange is good, white is bad, right? That's what I've been told living in New Mexico my whole life. So white rice, white pasta, all that stuff, okay? So how do we use calories? So just sitting here, just watching me, listening to me, your body needs a certain amount of calories just to survive, breathe, have your organs function properly, all right? And we call that the basal metabolic rate, so BMR. So calories, if you just think about calories not just being in food, it's how our body, it's basically energy, quote unquote energy in our body. So we need a certain number just to sit there and do nothing. We call that BMR. There's a mathematical equation to find it. It's different for men and women based on your height, weight, and years and age. We call it the Harris-Benedict equation. We figure out that number, and then we multiply it by this number. So after the BMR, we have our total daily energy expenditure. So we take into the account all the activity that we're going to do throughout the day. So checking trucks, working out, playing sports, things like that. Goes from sedentary to extremely active. Sedentary being sitting on the couch, right? Maintain your weight throughout. Extremely active, working out twice a day, or just, fully active throughout the whole day. So we see a coefficient on the very end. That number we're going to multiply by our BMR number. So a moderately active male, as an example, has 1,895 just to survive and sit there and do nothing. All right? We take that and multiply it by the moderately active coefficient, 1.4, and we get 2,650 calories. All right? So that's an important number. If we have a goal to lose weight, we need to have a deficit of calories throughout the day. Okay? So how am I going to get there? 3,500 calories is 1 pound of fat. So if I take that 35 divided by 7 days, because there's 7 days in a week, I come up with 500. So I'm just going to subtract that 500 from that 2,650. And then I get a 2,150 number. That's going to be my goal throughout the day, to get that 2,150. Okay, kind of makes sense? If I'm the opposite spectrum and I'm like really thin, skinny, have a really hard time putting on weight, I'm going to do a surplus. So I'm going to add 500. And it's not going to make you fat if you do that. It will if you just sit on the couch and you're sedentary and you don't do anything, sure. But if you exercise, work out, that surplus in calories is going to help you put on some muscle. If 500 a day is just too much, okay, you guys can stretch it out a little longer, go 10 days, and that's 350 calories a day. So 350 calories is 3 cookies, 2 donuts, not much. What's up, Mecca?
What is dropping too many calories? Where does it become kind of dangerous?
The healthy recommendation is, I would say, about 500 a day. 1 pound a week is usually, 1 to 2 pounds a week is usually the healthy way to go. Anything more than that, obviously if you guys start a new way of eating, a lot of people will drop weight right away, but a lot of that's just water, all right? So we go back to the empty calorie thing. 3 cookies, 2 donuts is 350 calories, all right? Calories that's been stripped of fiber, it's been stripped of any minerals or vitamins, all right? It spikes your blood sugar, spikes your insulin, all right? It's only in your system for about an hour, right? When your insulin drops, that blood sugar drops, what happens?
Hungry again.
You get hungry again, right? So you go back for more, and it's just a vicious kind of cycle.
Of deliciousness.
Did you say delicious cycle or vicious cycle?
So obviously we know in America, a large portion of the population is overweight and obese. So eating too many refined carbs or refined sugars is a big part of that problem. Because they're low in fiber and digested quickly, swings in blood sugar go up and down, insulin spikes, which causes that hunger and causes overeating. And we kind of talked about things high on the glycemic index won't leave you feeling fuller. Things lower on the index will have that more satiating feeling. So blood sugar drops about an hour or two after the refined carb meal. Once that does, we talked about getting hungry again, so it promotes the hunger, stimulates the part of the brain associated with the reward and craving. So who watched The Science Behind Addiction, one of the videos Gabe put out? Yeah, so what did he say that we needed to survive? We needed food, we needed water, and we needed what? Huh?
Serotonin?
Dopamine.
Dopamine, sorry.
Okay. So do you guys think like high sugar or refined sugar has an effect on our dopamine? Absolutely, yeah. So when we eat it, it creates that addictive kind of feeling where we want to go back to it just to get that happy feeling. So long-term studies show that eating refined carbs is linked with increased belly fat over the course of 5 years. So who said true?
Zeke.
No, Zeke. So yeah, so eating a high carb diet over multiple years, right? We can see that in your assessments too. So we can see at the
Real sneaky there, bro.
you guys didn't let me finish, man. You didn't let me finish. I said we can see that in the other direction, right? So when you guys lose belly fat and we do circumference measuring, right? The number in your percentage goes down, the inches in your waist go down. Men hold a lot of body fat, most of it around their bellies. Women mostly around their thighs and their hips. All right, so those numbers are useful for you guys to keep in mind. All right, heart disease. Obviously, in the fire department, heart disease, cardiac arrest is still the #1 killer. This is on-duty stuff, so cardiac arrest is 39%, internal trauma and crushing is 36%. Obviously, retirement stuff, cancers getting up there with cardiac arrest. But it's a big deal. It's #1. Okay, so a lot of us know one of our retirees recently retired, had a huge heart attack recently. So he's lucky to be alive right now. And if you guys know him at all, you knew how he ate, right? So that probably had a big contribution to it. So refined carbs increase your blood triglyceride. So triglyceride is just another word for fat. So it's fat inside your blood. All right, your body converts any calories it doesn't need or it doesn't use right away into that fat. Okay, so if we're eating a really high surplus in refined carbs, which are empty, and we're going back and back, we're going to have that surplus in our body. Anything that we don't use, it's going to get stored away as body fat. All right, so that's when the problems come in. An exception of that would be, if we're really, really active, okay, play sports and things like that, our body is gonna use that for energy, okay? So our body uses 2 things for energy. It uses carbohydrates and it uses fat, okay? It's always gonna choose to use that carbohydrate first, so anytime that's in our bloodstream, it's gonna use it first. If that's absent, it's gonna start using fat for energy. All right, so that's why you hear people going on certain ways of eating, like the keto diet's a high protein, high fat, low carb diet. I won't get into the science of it, but it burns the fat. Your body goes fat adapted instead of carbohydrate adapted and starts burning a lot of body fat. All right, kind of makes sense. So with all that excess calories turning into fat in your blood, it can contribute to hardening of the arteries and thickening of the artery walls, which is a big contributor to cardiovascular disease. And then obviously, most refined carbs, or most people who eat a high diet of refined carbs are 2 to 3 times more likely to get heart disease compared to those who eat the less. So when you eat a diet rich in sweets and carbs, what happens? Your body has to consistently produce large quantities of insulin and make sure your blood sugar does not rise too high. So we're all EMTs, paramedics, we understand how insulin works. It's the gatekeeper of the sugar entering our cells, okay? So if we constantly have that sugar in our bloodstream, we have that insulin that is produced by the pancreas that gets in our system, and it's knocking at the cell, okay? But it's constantly there, right? The cells are gonna kind of start to ignore it. So the insulin's gonna start to have to knock louder, okay? So an analogy would be when insulin constantly floods your cells, it's like constantly screaming in someone's ear. Eventually they'll get a bit deaf, your cells become deaf to insulin, and your body needs to produce more and more to keep putting that sugar away. So the more and more it keeps producing, we have what we call insulin resistance that happens. Okay? So then it kind of creates that cycle we talked about, right? We eat that sugar into our blood. The pancreas needs to produce that insulin, okay? Our blood sugar rises, and then anything excess is weight gain, and then we get that hunger feeling when our blood sugar and insulin drop back down, and then we go back and do it again. All right, so constant hunger can be a sign of insulin resistance. Main thing is just limit your carbohydrate intake and you won't have that problem. So relating it to cardiovascular disease, all right? We talked about it a little bit. So when the sugar enters your body, where does it get shuttled away? It has 2 options. It either gets burned, all right, if we're active, or it gets converted to the fat in our blood. And then if we keep eating carbs and sugars, when would our body have the opportunity to reach for those fat stores to burn it? All right, it wouldn't, right? Because it's always going to choose that carb first. So I'm sure you guys have heard like the term intermittent fasting. Anybody heard that? So it's just a period of time. For an example, say I eat dinner at 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock. I go to bed, and then I skip breakfast in the morning and don't eat till noon. Okay, so I'm fasting for like 16 hours. All right, so during that time, it's going to deplete all that sugar in my body, and my body's going to start reaching for those fat stores to try to burn for energy. All right, so if you guys go back and research that, have a goal of losing weight. All right, it's ton of people lose weight on that strategy, and if you guys have questions about that, I can answer them too. So as a culture, fire department, society, like how did we kind of get into this crazy refined world, right? Businesses started creating this because it's inexpensive, okay? So companies like Nestle, Pepsi, Kellogg's, McDonald's, they make these foods very addicting. Okay, they taste great, obviously, right, Metcalf? They start doing deceptive advertising, right, and banning things as healthy foods. All right, so one thing I want you guys to keep in mind, they're not restricted in some of the nutritional claims. So if you see something labeled like now made with protein, if you guys don't look at the nutrition label on the back to see actually how much protein is in there, all they have to do is put a very small amount in there, right? So it could be, for example, like one of those fruit smoothies, but then they say, oh, now made with protein, but has 46 grams of sugar in it, and like 4 grams of protein. So they're trying to trick you to make you think you're doing something good when it's actually doing the opposite. So just keep in mind, right, these businesses are in the business of selling food. They're in the business of making money. They're not in the business of making us healthy. They don't care about our health, okay? One of the worst things that we can do as far as like fast food and stuff, right? We talked about how our body uses energy. Most of those fast food places, okay, are high fat and high carb, okay? So, you know, a Big Mac, French fries, fried chicken, right? Anything you can think of that's fast food is gonna be really high in carbs and really high in fat. So our body's gonna reach for those carbs, and all that high fat we just ate is gonna get stored away as fat in our body. Right? So then we have that agricultural business, okay, huge corn industry, huge sugars, soybean. So do you guys think you eat a lot of soy in your diet?
Try not to. I don't. There's a lot of it out there.
The vegetarian does. So if you guys don't think you do, if you guys have ever looked at the ingredients on your processed foods, probably 99% of the time it has soy in it. All right? You might think that it's not very much, but if you add up each thing you eat into like a one type of meal, that's a lot of soy over time. So what does soy do to us?
Makes him angry. Wait, no, conscious.
No. So
Makes you badass.
it raises our estrogen and our estrogen. So,
That's why he's so nice.
Increases liberalism.
so it's tough because all these foods are so cheap, right? And all the whole foods are so expensive. I'm sure we've all walked into like a Whole Foods grocery store and the prices are just outrageous, right? And it's frustrating because someone that's not educated on the whole topic, for an example, like I'll go to the grocery store and I'll look at an organic tomato and it's like $3 a pound. So it's, you know, probably a little more than a pound of tomato, so $3+. And then I'll walk down one of the middle aisles and see a box of those sweet honey buns, and there's like 6 in a box, and it's like $1.50, right? So you see a mom of like 6 kids wanting to feed her kids, you know, she can get, well, I can feed each kid with 1 honey bun for $1.50 versus maybe 2 kids with this nutritious tomato, right? So it's kind of a crappy thing that our government makes those type of foods so cheap versus the healthy kind of food. So maybe it's conspiracy, right? They want to drive the healthcare costs up so big pharma can get our money.
Wow.
Dang.
There's that liberalism.
Yeah, that's my bias.
Watch Netflix before you
I'll bring up Netflix right here. So everybody's seen the FDA guidelines, the food pyramid. Yeah, so they implemented that in 1970. So the bottom, the big one, is a bunch of grains. Fruit and vegetables are next, meat and dairy, and then like the sugar and the fat is on top. So they told us to eat low-fat dairy, low-fat foods. They want us to start eating margarine, right? They told us margarine was good for us. You guys know how bad margarine is for us? Yes. So it's hard to take their recommendations seriously. We can look at the graph and say that correlation isn't necessarily causation, but when they implemented that, right, we had a pretty strict rise in obesity rates to 2014, right? And the argument can be made, well, maybe the Americans just didn't follow the guidelines, but we have data on that too. So during that time, grains consumption went up, vegetables, oils went up 100%, right? Vegetable oil is pretty unhealthy for us with the trans fats. Meat and eggs, kind of even. Sugars went up, dairy went down, fruits and vegetables went up a little bit. Fats from animals went way down at 33%. Nuts went way up. Okay, what about meat consumption? So that other graph showed it was pretty level. This one shows it's about 4%. But red meat, right? They told us red meat is the devil. They said, I'm sure you guys have seen Netflix, What the Health? Yeah, they told us that it's like smoking a cigarette, right? If you eat processed or red meat. So during that time, red meat went down 28%. All right, poultry went up 110%. Eggs went down. Fish went way up. So if we're listening and following their guidelines, why did all the obesity rates and health problems start going up? Right. So to me, a diet high in that grain consumption, which is what they told us to do. And if you guys, just to go back to that documentary, has anybody seen that doc? A few people? So they cite these studies, all right? And when you watch it, you're like, oh man, well, if it's science, right, it must be true. Okay, but think about, there's a different type of study that they do. So one is called an epidemiology study, and that's the one they did. It's basically a survey. So if I want to do a study on this room, I hand out a survey. It has a checkbox of what you ate 3 weeks ago, and whatever questions they want to ask you. But then they take the collective documentation and they base an idea on that. So number one, they got to assume that you're telling the truth, which humans obviously don't tell the truth a lot of the time. They got to require you to remember what you ate 3 weeks ago. And I know a lot of people have bad memories. And then they don't take into account how much you exercise. Maybe you're a smoker, maybe you drink a lot, right? They don't take that into account. But you checked the box that said you ate red meat, and that's what gave you cancer, all right? So the other kind of study is a randomized controlled trial where they actually control what is happening. And with food, that one's a lot more difficult to do because you got to lock people up in a room or something, and we're not going to do that, and only give them, whatever we want to feed them. So there are some studies out there like that, but for like a really large population, we can't do that. It's a survey. So it's been talked about recently that most of the scientists really don't trust that type of study. So take that for what it is. So your macronutrient shift, macros are your fats, your protein, and your carbs. Carbs went up by 30%, fat went down, and saturated fat went down. Okay, so obviously we're listening. We still got more unhealthy. So how do we fight it? Eat food on the lower side of that glycemic index, okay? The fibrous, nutritious foods. Avoid the sugars, avoid the soys if you can. I know they're in everything, but try to eat as much real food as you can. Beef, chicken, fish, pork, eggs, green leafy vegetables, fibrous fruits, nuts. Saturated fat is good fat, okay? Trans fat is the awful fat we don't want to touch, all right? And the FDA actually came out and said that they're gonna, within 3 years, require all the manufacturers to not put that in their products because it's so bad. Low carb, high fat diets. The cool thing about that way of eating, and I don't like to call them diets, I just like to call them ways of eating, is that it's more about the quantity and quality versus the calories. Okay, the calories and stuff aren't the major focus, it's the quality is the focus. And so just me speaking from experience, I've tried pretty much every way of eating, paleo, keto. I went on a carnivore diet or a carnivore way of eating for 8 months where I ate nothing but meat. I didn't have one vegetable, didn't have one fruit. Ate eggs and cheese, and the benefits that I got from that were pretty good. And it wasn't just physical, a lot of it was mental too. So the only reason I stopped doing it is just because it got boring of eating meat all the time, and it was kind of on the more expensive side. But some of the benefits, if you guys research that yourselves, there's a lot of guys online that do it. But as far as like the mental health side, my mood stabilized, right? I didn't have these spikes in sugar all the time. So, I would get these like periods where I would just feel down and I wouldn't know why. And I'm assuming it's because of that drop in that blood sugar. But on that all meat diet, I didn't have those spikes because I didn't have all that sugar in my blood. So it was maintained. My anxiety went away. I didn't really have anxiety anymore. So there's a ton of benefits, more than physical benefits, by the food that you put in your mouth, right? So really quick, the nutrition label. The main things I want you guys to notice, all right, is your macronutrients, your proteins, fats, carbohydrates is right in the middle. Your micronutrients, like your vitamin D, calcium, magnesium is right underneath. Usually right underneath this is your ingredients, okay? But the point of this is that you see the calories of 290, but when you guys look at a nutrition label, really focus on how many servings are in that container. All right, for an example, I can get like a teriyaki chicken bowl from the store, and I look at the nutrition label and I see that 290. I'm like, oh man, this is healthy. It's only 290 calories. But I failed to see that there's 5 servings in the container. So that's like 1,500 calories almost, right? So really focus on how many calories you guys are consuming, and that's the way you do it on a nutrition label. Cool, makes sense. So good food is good medicine. No one's going to care about your own health but you, all right? And I know Bob said that even if you're healthy, you're still going to die. That's totally true. We're all going to die someday. But we just want to try to have the best quality of life while you guys are still alive. So with that said, you guys got questions on anything? No? All right, so let's just take 5 minutes real quick, and then I'll do my last lecture, and we can get out of here.